The winter of 1882 struck Wyoming territory with a vengeance that even the oldest settlers could not recall, and Quinn York had lived through enough brutal seasons to know when nature meant to kill. He guided his horse along the bank of the Sweetwater River, the animal's breath forming white clouds in the frigid air as the wind cut through his layers of wool and leather like they were nothing more than paper. The sky hung low and gray, promising more snow before nightfall, and Quinn knew he should have turned back toward his ranch an hour ago. But something pulled him forward, an unexplainable feeling in his gut that he had learned never to ignore during his 30 years of life on this unforgiving land. The sound reached him first, a desperate splashing that seemed impossible given how thick the ice had grown over the past week. Quinn urged his horse faster, his gloved hands tightening on the reins as his heart began to hammer against his ribs. When he rounded the bend in the river, he saw her, a woman in the water, her arms flailing against the current that rushed beneath the broken ice. Her dark hair spread around her like ink in water, and even from a distance, he could see her lips had turned blue, her movements growing weaker with each passing second. Quinn did not hesitate. He threw himself from his horse, his boots hitting the frozen ground hard as he ran toward the riverbank. The woman's eyes found his, wide with terror and fading hope, and he saw her mouth form a word he could not hear over the roar of the water. He grabbed his rope from his saddle, his fingers working quickly despite the cold that made them stiff and clumsy. The ice cracked ominously under his weight as he edged closer to where she struggled, and he knew he had only moments before she either went under or the cold stopped her heart entirely. He threw the rope, and by some miracle she caught it, her frozen fingers wrapping around the hemp with the last of her strength. Quinn braced himself and pulled, his muscles straining as he hauled her through the water toward the bank. The ice gave way beneath his feet, and suddenly he was waist-deep in water so cold, it felt like knives stabbing into his flesh. He kept pulling, kept moving, until finally his hands closed around her arms and he dragged them both onto solid ground. She was not breathing. Quinn rolled her onto her side, water pouring from her mouth as he pressed against her back. He had seen men drown before, had lost a good friend to a river crossing gone wrong, and he refused to let this woman become another victim of the wilderness. He worked frantically, his own body shaking from the cold, until finally she coughed and gasped, her body convulsing as she drew in desperate breaths of air. But she was unconscious within seconds, her eyes rolling back as the cold claimed her awareness. Quinn looked at the darkening sky, at his horse standing nearby, and knew they would both die if they did not get warm immediately. His ranch was still 3 miles away, but there was no other choice. He wrapped her in his coat, lifted her onto his horse, and climbed up behind her, holding her against his chest as he urged his mount into a gallop. The ride back was a blur of white snow and growing darkness. Quinn could feel the woman's heartbeat against his arm, weak but steady, and he talked to her even though she could not hear him, telling her to hold on, promising her she would be all right. His own body screamed in protest, the wet clothing freezing against his skin, but he pushed the discomfort aside. He had survived worse. He would survive this. The ranch appeared through the snow like a blessed vision. The simple wooden house and barn that he had built with his own hands 5 years ago when he had finally saved enough money to buy this land. His horses were in the barn, protected from the worst of the weather, and smoke rose from the chimney, which meant old Samuel, the man who helped him with the ranch work, had kept the fire going. Quinn half fell from his horse, the woman still clutched in his arms. Samuel came running from the barn, his weathered face going pale at the sight of them both soaked and frozen. Good Lord, Quinn, what happened? Samuel reached for the woman, but Quinn shook his head. Get more wood on the fire. Heat water. I need every blanket we have. Quinn's voice came out rough, his throat raw from the cold. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him as the warmth of the house hit him like a physical force. His hands were shaking so badly, he could barely manage the buttons of her wet dress, but he knew leaving her in the frozen clothing would kill her as surely as the river would have. He worked quickly, his eyes averted as much as possible, replacing her wet things with his own dry long underwear and wool socks, then wrapping her in every quilt and blanket he owned. His bed was in the corner of the single-room cabin, and he laid her there, tucking the covers around her before stripping off his own wet clothes and pulling on dry ones. The fire roared in the stone fireplace Samuel had built up, and Quinn dragged a chair close to the bed, settling in to watch over the woman who had nearly died in his arms. She was beautiful, even with her face pale and her lips still tinged with blue. Her features were delicate but strong, high cheekbones and a straight nose, dark eyelashes resting against her cheeks. Quinn guessed she was perhaps 25 or 26, young but not a girl. He wondered what she had been doing out near the river, how she had ended up in the water, whether anyone was looking for her. Samuel brought him hot coffee and a bowl of stew, hovering nearby with concern written across his lined face. She going to make it? I think so, Quinn said, though he was not entirely certain. Her heart is beating and she is breathing well enough. Now we just have to hope the cold has not done permanent damage. Who is she? I have no idea. Quinn wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, letting the heat seep into his frozen fingers. I found her in the river about 3 miles upstream. No horse, no wagon, nothing. Samuel's bushy eyebrows drew together. That is strange, mighty strange. No woman would be out there alone on foot, not in this weather. Quinn agreed, but speculation would have to wait. For now, he needed to make sure she survived the night. He sent Samuel back to the barn to tend to the horses and settled in to keep watch. Every few minutes he checked her pulse, her breathing, the color slowly returning to her skin. He added more logs to the fire until the room was almost uncomfortably warm, but he could see her body had stopped shaking, which he took as a good sign. Hours passed. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters and driving snow against the windows. Quinn dozed in his chair, jerking awake periodically to check on his unexpected guest. Somewhere around midnight, he noticed her breathing had changed, become deeper and more regular, and he allowed himself to hope she would truly recover. Dawn broke gray and cold, with fresh snow covering everything in sight. Quinn had barely slept, his body aching from the previous day's ordeal and the uncomfortable position in the wooden chair. He was adding more wood to the fire when he heard a soft sound from the bed. He turned to find her eyes open, staring at him with confusion and fear. "Easy," he said softly, moving slowly so as not to startle her. "You are safe. You are at my ranch." She tried to sit up, but her body was not ready for that, and she fell back against the pillows with a small cry of distress. Quinn poured water from the pitcher on the table and brought it to her, helping her take small sips while she looked around the room with growing panic. "Where am I? What happened?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You were in the Sweetwater River," Quinn explained, settling back in his chair beside the bed. "I pulled you out yesterday afternoon. You were nearly frozen to death. I brought you back here to warm up." Her hand went to her throat, her eyes closing as memories seemed to flood back. "The bridge. I was crossing the bridge and it gave way. I remember falling, the water so cold I could not breathe, and then nothing until now." "You are lucky to be alive," Quinn said. Another few minutes and you would not have made it." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his weathered features, the concern in his gray eyes, the day's worth of stubble on his strong jaw. "You saved my life. I did what anyone would have done." "No," she said firmly, though her voice was still weak. "Most people would not have risked themselves for a stranger. Thank you." Quinn felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, unused to being the center of such attention. He stood and moved to the stove where Samuel had left a pot of broth warming. "You should eat something. You need to rebuild your strength." As he ladled the broth into a bowl, he heard her shifting in the bed. "I should probably know the name of the man whose bed I am in." Despite himself, Quinn smiled. "Quinn York, and you are Olivia Vale," she answered, "though everyone calls me Liv." "Well, Miss Vale, you gave me quite a scare yesterday." He brought her the broth, helping her sit up enough to eat without spilling. She was weak, her hands trembling as she held the bowl, and he found himself sitting on the edge of the bed to steady it for her. "I was traveling to Fort Yuma," Olivia explained between sips of the warm liquid. "My brother is stationed there with the army. I was supposed to meet up with a guide in South Pass City, but the storm came in faster than expected. I thought I could make it across the bridge before the worst of it hit, but the wood was rotten, I suppose. It just collapsed beneath my horse." "Your horse?" Quinn's gut tightened. "Did it make it out?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "I do not know. She tried to climb onto the ice, but it kept breaking. I lost sight of her when the current took me downstream." Quinn made a mental note to check the river once the weather cleared. If the horse had survived, it would need help. If it had not, well, at least they would know. "How far from South Pass City were you?" "Maybe 5 miles. I am not certain. Everything looked the same in the snow." Olivia finished the broth and leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion clear on her face despite having just woken. "My brother will be worried. I was supposed to arrive in Fort Yuma 2 weeks ago." "Fort Yuma is in Arizona territory," Quinn said gently. "You have a long way yet to travel and not in this weather. You will need to stay here until you are recovered and the storm passes." He could see the conflict on her face, propriety warring with practicality. A single woman staying alone with a bachelor was scandalous, but dying of cold or injury would be considerably worse. "I do not wish to impose." "You already are in my bed," Quinn pointed out, then realized how that sounded and felt heat rise to his face. "I mean, you are already here and moving you would be foolish. Samuel, my ranch hand, lives here too, so you have a chaperone of sorts. Though I doubt anyone will venture out in this weather to judge us regardless." Olivia smiled at his discomfort, and Quinn found himself noticing the way it transformed her face, bringing warmth to her features. "Then, I accept your hospitality, Mr. York. Though I insist I will repay you somehow when I am able." "No need," Quinn said, standing from the bed and moving back to his chair, suddenly aware of how close they had been. "Just focus on healing." Over the next few days, Quinn learned more about Olivia Vale than he had learned about any person in years. She was not the type to stay quiet, even when ill, and she filled the cabin with stories of her life back in Philadelphia, where she had worked as a teacher until her brother's letters had convinced her to come west. Her parents had died years ago, leaving her and her brother as the only family either had left. She was 24, just as he had guessed, and she had a quick wit that often caught him off guard and made him laugh in ways he had almost forgotten he could. Samuel took to her immediately, which surprised Quinn given the old man's usual gruff demeanor around strangers. But Olivia had a way of putting people at ease, of making them feel valued and heard. She insisted on helping with small tasks as soon as she was strong enough to sit up properly, mending torn shirts and organizing Quinn's haphazard collection of supplies with an efficiency that bordered on alarming. "How did you live like this?" she asked on the third day, holding up a can with no label. "Do you just guess what you are eating?" Quinn looked up from the harness he was repairing and shrugged. "Usually I remember where I put things." "Usually," Olivia repeated, shaking her head with amusement. "Well, not anymore. I am organizing this properly, and you are going to label things from now on." "Yes, madam," Quinn said with mock seriousness, earning himself a swat with a dish towel. The storm continued, trapping them all inside for days. Quinn slept on the floor near the fire, giving Olivia his bed despite her protests. He did not mind. He had slept in far worse places during his years as a ranch hand before buying this land, and knowing she was comfortable made the hard floor bearable. Besides, it kept a proper distance between them, which he told himself was necessary even as he found his eyes drawn to her more and more often. She was unlike any woman he had ever known. Most of the women in this territory were hardened by the harsh life, worn down by endless work and bitter winters. But Olivia seemed to bloom even in adversity, her spirit undimmed by what she had endured. She asked him endless questions about the ranch, about his life, about his dreams for the future, and she actually listened to his answers with genuine interest. In turn, he found himself wanting to know everything about her. What books she liked to read, what made her laugh, what had really driven her to leave everything familiar and travel west. The answers came in pieces, woven through their conversations as they passed the long hours while the storm raged outside. "I wanted adventure," she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, Quinn whittling a piece of wood while Olivia worked on darning his socks. Philadelphia felt like a cage. Every day the same as the one before, teaching the same lessons to children who did not want to learn, coming home to an empty house. When my brother wrote about the wild beauty of the West, about the freedom and possibility, I knew I had to see it for myself. "The reality is often harder than the dream," Quinn said, thinking of his own reasons for coming west, the things he had left behind in Missouri. "I know," Olivia said quietly. "I nearly died before I even got to see any of it, but you know what? Even that, as terrible as it was, made me feel more alive than I had felt in years. Does that make sense?" Quinn met her eyes across the firelight and nodded. "It does." The snow finally stopped on the fifth day, though the cold remained brutal. Quinn ventured outside to help Samuel with the animals and to check on the state of the roads. Everything was buried under 3 feet of fresh powder, and he knew it would be at least another week before travel would be possible, maybe longer. When he returned to the cabin, stamping snow from his boots, he found Olivia up and dressed in her own clothes, which had finally dried completely. "I should move to the barn," she announced without preamble. "You have been more than generous, but I cannot continue to take your bed while you sleep on the floor." "The barn is not fit for living," Quinn protested. "It is for the animals. Then I will sleep on the floor and you can have your bed back." They stared at each other, equally stubborn, until Quinn finally sighed. "We could compromise. The bed is large enough for both of us if we put some blankets down the middle as a barrier. That way we both stay warm and comfortable." He expected her to refuse, to be scandalized by the suggestion, but instead, Olivia considered it thoughtfully. "That is actually quite practical. Very well, but you must promise to stay on your side." "I promise," Quinn said, though the thought of sleeping so close to her made his heart race in a way he did not entirely understand. That night, they arranged the bed with a wall of folded quilts down the center, creating 2 distinct sleeping areas. Quinn lay on his side, staring at the log wall, acutely aware of Olivia's presence just inches away on the other side of the barrier. He could hear her breathing, slow and steady, and he wondered if she was truly asleep or lying awake as he was. "Quinn." Her voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes." "Thank you. Not just for saving me, but for everything. For your kindness, your patience. You have given me more than shelter. You have given me hope that there are still truly good people in the world." Quinn felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire still burning low in the hearth. "You are welcome, Liv. Sleep well." The days took on a rhythm. Quinn and Samuel worked to keep the ranch running despite the weather, feeding the cattle they had brought close to the barn before the storm, chopping endless amounts of wood, breaking ice on the water troughs. Olivia insisted on doing her part, cooking meals that were far superior to anything Quinn had eaten in years, keeping the cabin clean and organized, even helping Samuel treat a cow that had injured its leg. Quinn found himself looking forward to coming back inside, to the warmth and light and her presence. She made the cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep, and he caught himself imagining what it would be like if she stayed, if this was not just a temporary arrangement born of necessity. But he reminded himself that she had a destination, a brother waiting for her, a whole life planned out that did not include a struggling rancher in Wyoming territory. Still, he could not stop the way his heart lifted when she smiled at him, or the protectiveness that surged through him whenever he thought of her continuing her journey into the unknown dangers of the trail. One afternoon, about 10 days after he had pulled her from the river, Quinn came inside to find Olivia sitting at the table with tears streaming down her face. He was at her side in an instant, concern flooding through him. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, gesturing to a letter spread on the table before her. "I found this in my saddlebag. I had forgotten it was there. It is from my brother, his last letter before I left Philadelphia. He writes about a woman he met, someone he was courting. He sounds so happy, Quinn. And here I am, taking forever to reach him, and he must think something terrible has happened to me." Quinn pulled a chair close and sat beside her. "He does not think that. He knows the West is unpredictable, that weather and circumstances can delay travel. He would want you to be safe, which you are. But he is worried. I know he is. We only have each other, and I hate that I am causing him pain." Olivia wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, and without thinking, Quinn reached out and caught one of her tears with his thumb. The moment stretched between them, suddenly charged with something neither had acknowledged before. Quinn's hand was still raised to her face, and Olivia had gone very still, her eyes locked with his. He could see flecks of gold in their brown depths, could count every individual eyelash, could feel the warmth of her breath against his skin. He pulled back, suddenly aware of how inappropriate his gesture had been. "I am sorry. I did not mean to presume." "You did not presume," Olivia said softly. "You were being kind. You are always kind, Quinn. It is one of the many things I have come to admire about you." They stared at each other, years of loneliness and longing passing between them in that single look. Quinn wanted to tell her how he felt, how she had changed something fundamental in him, how the thought of her leaving felt like losing a part of himself he had only just discovered. But he had no right to those feelings, no right to burden her with them when she had her own path to follow. "The roads should be clear enough for travel in a few days," he said instead, hating himself for the words even as he spoke them. "I will take you to South Pass City. You can get a proper guide from there to Fort Yuma, someone who knows the trails and can keep you safe." Olivia's face did something complicated, an expression Quinn could not quite read. "Of course. That would be very helpful. Thank you. The warmth between them cooled, and Quinn stood, making excuses about needing to check on the cattle. He fled outside into the cold, his breath coming in harsh gasps that had nothing to do with the frigid air. Samuel found him an hour later, standing in the barn staring at nothing. "You are a damned fool," the old man said without preamble. "Excuse me. That girl in there has been looking at you the way a thirsty man looks at water, and you are out here moping instead of doing something about it." Samuel shook his head in disgust. "I thought you had more sense." "She is traveling to meet her brother," Quinn protested. "She has plans, a destination. I cannot ask her to give that up for a struggling rancher she has known for barely 2 weeks. Did you ever think maybe she would want to make that choice for herself?" Samuel moved closer, his voice gentle despite his harsh words. "Quinn, I have known you 5 years now. I have never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her. And I have seen enough in my life to recognize when two people have found something rare and worth fighting for. Do not let her leave without at least telling her how you feel." Quinn wanted to argue, to insist it was foolish and impractical, but the words would not come. Because Samuel was right. He was falling in love with Olivia Vale, had probably started falling the moment he pulled her from the river, and she had looked at him with those desperate, trusting eyes. And the thought of watching her ride away without knowing if she felt even a fraction of what he did was suddenly unbearable. But that night, lying on his side of the bed with the wall of blankets between them, Quinn still could not find the courage to speak. The words built up in his throat, pressing against his teeth, but fear held them back. Fear of rejection, fear of ruining the easy friendship they had built, fear of his own unworthiness. "I will miss this," Olivia's voice came soft through the darkness. "Miss what?" "This. Being here, feeling safe and content, having someone to talk to at the end of the day. I have not felt this at peace in years, maybe ever." She paused, and Quinn could hear the rustle of blankets as she shifted. "Is that strange? That I would feel so at home in a place I never planned to be, with people I never planned to meet?" "No," Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. "That is not strange at all." He heard her breathing change, becoming slower, and knew she was drifting toward sleep. He lay awake for hours after, staring at the dark ceiling, fighting a battle between his heart and his head. The next day dawned clear and bright, the sun glinting off the snow with blinding intensity. Quinn announced that he would ride out to check the condition of the main road, to see if it was truly passable yet. He needed space to think, distance to clear his head and figure out what he was going to do about the tangle of feelings in his chest. He returned several hours later to find Olivia outside the cabin, throwing snowballs at a makeshift target she had set up against the barn wall. She turned at the sound of his horse, her face flushed from the cold and exertion, and Quinn felt his heart stutter at the sight of her joy. "The road?" she asked, letting her arm drop to her side. "Passable if we are careful. We could leave the day after tomorrow if you wish." Something flickered across her face there and gone too quickly for him to identify. "That's soon. Unless you want to wait longer. There is no rush, Liv. You can stay as long as you need." Quinn dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn, and Olivia fell into step beside him. "My brother is waiting," she said, but there was no enthusiasm in her voice. "I should get to him as soon as possible." They walked in silence until they reached the barn door, then Quinn turned to face her, some of his resolve finally firming. "Can I ask you something, of course? Are you happy, about leaving, I mean, about continuing to Fort Yuma?" He held his breath, watching her face carefully. Olivia looked down at her boots, at the snow packed around them anywhere but at him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I do not know. 2 weeks ago I would have said yes without hesitation, but now everything feels different. I feel different." "How?" Quinn pressed, taking a step closer. She met his eyes then, and he saw his own turmoil reflected in her gaze. "I feel like I found something here that I did not know I was looking for. Like maybe all my plans were leading me to exactly where I was supposed to be, even if it was not where I thought I was going." Quinn's heart was hammering so hard he was certain she must be able to hear it. "And where is that?" "Here," Olivia whispered. "With you." The world seemed to stop, crystallizing around that single moment. Quinn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was cold from the winter air, but her eyes were warm, full of hope and fear and something that looked remarkably like love. "I have been trying to figure out how to let you go," he admitted, his voice rough. "But I do not think I can. These past weeks, having you here, it has shown me what my life could be, what I want it to be, and that is with you, Liv, if you will have me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "Are you offering me your heart, Quinn York?" "I am offering you everything," he said. "My heart, my home, my future. I know it is fast, and I know I do not have much to give compared to what you could have elsewhere, but I love you, Olivia Vale. I love your strength and your laughter and the way you make this cabin feel like more than just four walls. Stay with me, please." Instead of answering with words, Olivia rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened as years of loneliness and longing poured from both of them into that single point of connection. Quinn pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her as she melted against him, and he marveled at how perfectly she fit, as if she had been made for this exact moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Olivia was crying in earnest, but her smile was radiant. "I love you too. I think I have since you pulled me from that river, but I was too afraid to admit it. Yes, Quinn. Yes to everything." They stood there in the snow, holding each other, until Samuel's voice called from the barn, startling them apart like guilty children. The old man appeared in the doorway, took one look at their faces, and grinned. "About damn time," he announced. "Now get inside before you both freeze and I have to do all the work around here myself." The next weeks were a blur of joy and practical preparations. Olivia wrote to her brother, explaining everything that had happened and asking for his blessing on their union. Quinn sold some cattle to buy her a proper ring from the jeweler in South Pass City. A simple gold band with a small diamond that Olivia declared was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. They were married in late March, as soon as the circuit preacher made his rounds through the territory. The ceremony was simple, held in the cabin with Samuel and a few neighboring ranchers as witnesses, but to Quinn, it was more meaningful than any grand society wedding could have been. Olivia wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric they had bought on that trip to South Pass City, and Quinn had never seen anything more beautiful than the sight of her walking toward him, her eyes shining with love and promise. The wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining not just of bodies but of souls. Quinn had been with women before, brief encounters in his younger years that had meant little, but this was different. This was Olivia, his wife, his partner, his love. Every touch was a discovery, every kiss a revelation. They loved each other with desperate tenderness, making promises with their hands and mouths that words could never capture. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed with no wall of blankets between them, Olivia traced patterns on Quinn's chest with her finger. "I never imagined it could be like this," she murmured. "Like what? So perfect, so right, like coming home to a place you did not know existed." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with such love it made his chest ache. "Thank you for saving me, Quinn, in more ways than one." He pulled her down for another kiss, pouring everything he felt into it. "Thank you for letting me." Spring came late that year, but with spectacular beauty when it finally arrived. The snow melted, revealing the brown grass beneath, which quickly turned green under the warming sun. Wildflowers burst from the ground in riots of color, and the cattle grew fat on the lush pasture. Quinn worked from dawn to dusk, building onto the cabin to make more room, repairing fences, planning for the future. Olivia threw herself into ranch life with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything. She learned to ride properly, to rope cattle, to treat common ailments in the animals. She kept a meticulous ledger of their finances and suggested improvements that Quinn admitted he should have thought of years ago. But more than that, she filled the ranch with life and warmth and laughter. In June, a letter arrived from Olivia's brother, Oliver. He wrote that he was happy for her, that he wanted to visit when he had leave, and that he had married the woman he had been courting. Olivia cried when she read it, but they were tears of joy. Everything had worked out better than she could have imagined, and she told Quinn as much that night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I am pregnant," she said without preamble, and Quinn's hand froze. "You are certain as I can be." "I have missed my courses, and I have been sick every morning for the past week. I did not want to say anything until I was sure, but I am sure now." She looked up at him with cautious hope. "Are you happy?" Quinn felt like his heart might burst from his chest. "Happy? Liv, I am more than happy. I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am grateful beyond words." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "A baby, our baby." They spent the rest of the night talking about the future, about names and possibilities and dreams. Quinn promised to build a proper cradle, to add another room to the cabin before winter came. Olivia worried about being a good mother, having never had one for very long herself, but Quinn assured her she would be wonderful. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Olivia bloomed with it, her face taking on a radiant glow that Quinn could not stop staring at. He became almost comically protective, refusing to let her do any heavy work and insisting she rest frequently. Samuel teased him mercilessly about it, but Quinn did not care. He had nearly lost her once to the river. He would not risk losing her again to anything. In early September, Oliver arrived with his new wife, a kind woman named Margaret who took to Olivia immediately. The four of them spent a wonderful week together, talking and laughing and sharing stories. Oliver pulled Quinn aside on the last night of their visit, his expression serious. "Take care of her," he said. "She is all the family I have left in this world, and I can see how much she loves you. Do not ever make me regret giving you my blessing." "I would sooner cut off my own arm than hurt her," Quinn replied honestly. "She is my entire world." Oliver studied him for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied. "I believe you. Welcome to the family, Quinn." Winter came again, but this time Quinn was prepared with extra wood, extra food, and extra blankets. Olivia was large with child now, moving slowly and tiring easily, but she remained in good spirits. The cabin they had expanded over the summer was warm and comfortable, with a separate room for the baby and space for all of them to move without crowding. On a frigid January night in 1884, with snow falling heavy outside and the wind howling through the canyon, Olivia went into labor. Quinn sent Samuel racing through the storm to fetch the midwife from the nearest ranch, a strong woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. While they waited, Quinn stayed by Olivia's side, holding her hand through the contractions and murmuring words of encouragement even as fear clawed at his throat. Mrs. Henderson arrived 2 hours later, covered in snow and already rolling up her sleeves. She shooed Quinn from the room, but Olivia cried out for him, refusing to let go of his hand. The midwife relented with a stern warning that he better not faint, and Quinn settled in for what turned out to be the longest night of his life. Olivia labored for 14 hours, her strength tested in ways that made Quinn feel utterly helpless. He had faced down angry bulls, survived brutal winters, endured physical hardships that would break most men. But watching the woman he loved in pain, unable to do anything to help, was the hardest thing he had ever experienced. Finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, their son was born. The baby's first cry filled the cabin, and Quinn felt tears stream down his face as Mrs. Henderson placed the tiny, squirming bundle in Olivia's arms. She looked exhausted but radiant, gazing down at their child with wonder and love so profound it seemed to light the room. "He is perfect," she whispered, then looked up at Quinn with shining eyes. "We made this perfect little person." Quinn leaned down to kiss her forehead, then gently touched his son's tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his, gripping with surprising strength, and Quinn felt something in him settle into place. This was his family. This was everything he had never known he wanted, everything he would spend the rest of his life protecting and cherishing. They named him Thomas, after Quinn's father who had died when Quinn was young. Thomas York, born in a Wyoming winter, surrounded by love and hope for the future. The baby was healthy and strong, with his mother's dark hair and what Quinn insisted were his gray eyes, though Mrs. Henderson pointed out all babies had gray eyes at first. The years that followed were filled with the kind of happiness Quinn had thought existed only in storybooks. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch and listening to his mother's stories. 2 years after Thomas was born, Olivia gave birth to twin girls, Clara and Rose, who filled the cabin with noise and laughter. Quinn expanded the ranch steadily, buying more land as he could afford it, building up his herd until York Ranch was known throughout the territory as one of the finest operations around. But no matter how busy he got, he always made time for his family, for evenings spent around the fireplace telling stories, for teaching his children to ride and rope, for quiet moments with Olivia when they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains gold. Samuel stayed on, becoming a beloved grandfather figure to the children and a trusted friend to both Quinn and Olivia. He taught Thomas to whittle and the girls to identify different bird calls, and he never tired of reminding Quinn that he had been right about taking a chance on love. Olivia never lost her love of learning and passed it on to their children with fierce dedication. She started a small school for the ranch families in the area, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic in their expanded cabin. She wrote regularly to her brother, and Oliver and Margaret visited every few years, their own family growing alongside Quinn and Olivia's. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Olivia back to the spot on the Sweetwater River where he had pulled her from the icy water. They stood on the bank, his arm around her waist, watching the water flow past in the summer sunshine. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had not been riding along the river that day?" Quinn asked. Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder. "I try not to. I prefer to think it was fate, that somehow the universe knew we needed to find each other." "I was so lonely before you came," Quinn admitted. "I did not even realize how much until you were here, until I understood what I had been missing. You did not just change my life, Liv. You gave me one worth living." She turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face in her hands the way he had done to her all those years ago in the snow. "You saved me first, remember, in every way possible. You offered me your heart when I had lost my way, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that I was brave enough to take it." They kissed there on the riverbank, the sun warm on their faces, the sound of water rushing past like a song. In the distance, they could hear their children's laughter as Samuel watched them play near the horses. This was their life, built from a moment of crisis and choice, forged through love and commitment and the daily decision to choose each other. Years continued to pass in the way they do, both too slow and too fast. The children grew, taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. Thomas proved to be a natural cattleman, with his father's patience and his mother's intelligence. Clara became fascinated with horses, breeding and training them with skill beyond her years. Rose discovered a talent for painting, capturing the beauty of the Wyoming landscape in watercolors that Olivia proudly displayed throughout their home. Quinn's hair turned gray at the temples, then silver, and Olivia found lines appearing around her eyes from years of smiling. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by shared experiences and weathered storms, by the raising of children and the building of a legacy. On the 20th anniversary of the day Quinn had pulled Olivia from the river, they threw a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, filling their land with laughter and music and joy. Their children, now young adults, stood with them as Quinn made a toast. 20 years ago, I was alone on this land, surviving but not really living. Then this stubborn, beautiful woman literally fell into my life, and everything changed. She taught me what it means to love, to build something lasting, to have faith in tomorrow. Olivia York, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Olivia kissed him, and the party continued long into the night with dancing and stories and celebration of a love that had beaten the odds. Thomas married at 22, bringing home a smart young woman named Elizabeth who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the far edge of the York property and started their own herd with cattle Quinn gifted them. Clara followed 2 years later, marrying a skilled horse trainer she had met at a competition in Cheyenne. Rose waited longer, focused on her art, but eventually found love with a gentle photographer who documented life in the West. Quinn and Olivia became grandparents, and if they had thought they understood love before, the birth of Thomas and Elizabeth's first child showed them new depths to the emotion. They delighted in spoiling their grandchildren, teaching them the same lessons they had taught their own children, watching the legacy they had built continue to grow and flourish. On a warm spring evening in 1912, 30 years after Quinn had pulled Olivia from the Sweetwater River, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The ranch had grown beyond Quinn's wildest dreams, a thriving operation that employed dozens of people and covered thousands of acres. But none of that mattered as much as the woman sitting beside him, her hand clasped in his. "I have been thinking," Olivia said, her voice carrying the comfortable rhythm of someone who had spent 3 decades in conversation with the same person. About how lucky we are. How easily everything could have gone differently, but somehow it all worked out better than I ever imagined possible." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Quinn York. I loved you that day you pulled me from the river, even though I did not know it yet. I loved you when you offered me your heart with such beautiful honesty. I loved you through every sunrise and sunset we have shared, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Quinn felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after all these years, she could still make him feel like that young cowboy who had been terrified and overwhelmed by the depth of his feelings. "I love you too, Liv. More than I have words to express. You made my life worth living, worth fighting for. Everything good in my world exists because you said yes to me that day in the snow." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in familiar rhythm. Around them, their family laughed and played, a living testament to the love story that had begun in a frozen river 30 years ago. Their children brought dinner out to the porch, refusing to let their aging parents do the work. The extended family gathered around the long table Quinn had built years ago, multiple generations sharing food and stories and love. This was what he had given Olivia when he pulled her from that river, Quinn thought, and what she had given him in return. Not just life, but a reason for it. Not just love, but a legacy. As the stars began to appear overhead, Clara's youngest grandson climbed into Quinn's lap, looking up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Grandpa, tell us the story again, about how you saved Grandma." Quinn smiled and began the tale he had told countless times, about a winter day when he had been riding along a frozen river and heard a sound that would change his life forever. Olivia reached over and took his hand again as he talked, and their eyes met over the child's head, full of shared memory and enduring love. The story ended as it always did, with Quinn explaining how he had offered Olivia his heart and she had accepted it, choosing to build a life with him in the wild, beautiful West. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard it all before, because some stories never got old. Some stories were worth repeating, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations. That night, after everyone had gone to their respective homes, Quinn helped Olivia up the stairs to their bedroom, their movements slower now but no less tender. They prepared for bed in the comfortable routine of long marriage, each knowing the other's patterns and preferences without need for words. As they lay together in the darkness, Olivia's head on Quinn's shoulder where it had rested for 3 decades, she sighed contentedly. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be," she murmured. "Always," Quinn agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "From the moment I pulled you from that river, you have been exactly where you belong, with me." They drifted toward sleep together, hands clasped, hearts joined, their love story complete and yet still ongoing with every breath they shared. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the grass, the same wind that had blown the day they met, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. The York Ranch continued to thrive for generations, but it was always remembered as a place built on love, started by a cowboy who saved a woman from a frozen river and was brave enough to offer her his heart, and a woman who was brave enough to accept it. Their story became legend in the territory, told around campfires and at family gatherings, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected circumstances, and that love, when true and deep, can build something that lasts forever. And in the years that followed, whenever anyone in the family faced difficult choices or uncertain futures, they would remember Quinn and Olivia, remember that day on the frozen river, and find the courage to take a leap of faith toward love and happiness, knowing that sometimes the most important decision you can make is to open your heart and let someone in, even when it seems impossible or impractical or too fast. That was the legacy they left behind, not just land and cattle and prosperity, but the understanding that love was worth the risk, always worth the risk, and that offering your heart to the right person was the bravest, most rewarding thing you could ever do. Their story proved that even in the harsh, unforgiving wilderness of the Old West, tenderness could bloom, love could flourish, and 2 lonely souls could find their home in each other's arms. Quinn lived to be 78 years old, still sharp-minded and strong-hearted until the end. When he passed quietly in his sleep one autumn night, Olivia held his hand and whispered her love to him one last time, thanking him for a life beyond her wildest dreams. She joined him 2 years later, on a winter day much like the one on which they had met, and the family laid them to rest side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their great-grandchildren still work the York Ranch today, keeping alive the traditions and values their ancestors established. The story of how it all began, of a cowboy and a frozen river and an offer of the heart, is still told with reverence and joy, a reminder that love and courage can create something beautiful and lasting, even in the harshest of circumstances. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the Wyoming prairie, people swear they can feel the presence of Quinn and Olivia still watching over the land and the family they created, their love story echoing through the generations as proof that true love never really ends. It just transforms into something eternal and unbreakable, as constant as the mountains and as enduring as the western sky.